Love is what will change our minds and change the world. Thanks to Tony for inviting me here, for all the staff and volunteers. Thank you to all of you for being here. And I also thank friends around the world who are here in spirit. You know that some didn't like the idea of a conference in Vegas. And when I was imagining this, what I was thinking of was sort of like us all being in it together, because inside we would have one environment, and outside there would be a different environment, sort of like on a cruise ship, you know? And so not exactly strangers in a strange land, but maybe pioneers or pilgrims of the new, which is a phrase that Jesus uses from time to time in the Course. Are very many of you new to it? Could I see, do I need to talk to people who are new to it? A few? Okay. Well, I really appreciate those who are new coming and being open to the new, because I think we're in a really exciting time. I think any time that you encounter something new, whether even if it's a new book, and you start reading that book and you know it has a lot to say to you, and there's that feeling, and it might be participating in a new phenomenon, and it enlivens you. And I felt that excitement when I discovered A Course in Miracles in the early 90s. I read it 7 times in 2 years and did the workbook as well. And I even felt that excitement reading the story of A Course in Miracles, Journey Without Distance. And I felt it hearing John Mundy speak about what it was like for him when A Course in Miracles was something new and starting something new in the world. And I believe that time is here for A Course of Love. I started receiving A Course of Love in 1998. 1998. And you know how Course in Miracles sat in a drawer, file drawer, they say, for like 7 years. Well, A Course of Love didn't literally do that, but A Course of Love remained obscure until the last few years when it became published. It was published in this combined volume, thanks to my wonderful publisher, Glenn Hoveman. And of course, it's due to more than that, too. You know, there are so many supportive people, and friends, and divine timing, and more people being ready to believe in love. So that's also part of why I played the song, because there's a spark been lit now. Something's happening. Something's going on. And that's the sense I'm here to share today. The flavor and the feel of both becoming new and entering a new time. As we change our minds, we change the world. As we become new, the world becomes new. As A Course of Love begins, we're given a visual image of this. It's from chapter 1. You are an immigrant coming to a new world with all your possessions in hand. But as you glimpse what was once a distant shore and now is near, you realize none of what you formerly possessed and called your treasures were needed. How silly you feel to have carted them from one place to the next. You do not realize as yet how heavy was your burden. What are our burdens? What I see are the trappings of a lifetime of learning. All the things that made us feel not so good about ourselves. All the things that made us feel that love had disappointed us and made us fearful of being alone. These have left us feeling duped by life. Jesus actually uses that word in A Course of Love, duped. All that we thought would make us happy seemed to stand out there somewhere. Need of being chased down or earned when it's all right here. So Jesus does everything in his power, and his power is great. To help us to rest our overactive minds and to bring us home to love. I've been saying lately that since I never got to go away to college, this time of going out with the books is my going away to college time. And I feel like it's coming a notch away from that new immigrant. You know, it's not the frightening time of being a new immigrant, but it's going out into the world newly, freshly, in the wholehearted way that all of us are called to do in A Course of Love. And I figure if I can do this, especially the public speaking part, all of you can do what you're called to do too. Because as Jesus brings us together with love's wisdom, he sets in motion this movement that we're all in. And it's a movement from pain to love, from separation to union, from ideal seeking perfectionism to intimate relationship, from being in our heads to being in our hearts, wholehearted, loved, and loving, from being human or divine to being human and divine as one. And here's the really big one. From being who we think we are or who we think we should be to being who we are in truth, to being all that we are. Jesus works differently in this course. He will tell you the course will not call you to effort of any kind. He will not ask you to leave behind your addictions or to go on a diet or a fast. He will not even ask you to be kind. And I did not make that up. That's a direct quote. And it sounds a little less funny as it goes on, saying this course merely calls you to sanity by calling you to let go of illusion in favor of the truth. And asks, does it not make sense that the only error possible is that of not being who you are? Now granted, that's not from the beginning of the book, that's from the middle. Since some of you are new to it, I'll just give you a little background of it. The course is made up of 3 books and more sections. The first book is simply the course. 4 treatises make up book 2. And in the dialogues, there's a 17-chapter narrative and a 40-day and 40-night experience. And there's a brilliant method to the madness that A Course of Love would seem to be. And I think it's stated really succinctly in 2 brief quotes, almost exactly the same. In the course we hear, the self you have taken out of the learning loop is the self of love. And in the dialogues, took the true self and true learner out of the learning loop. So almost exactly the same. And Jesus is saying basically that the ego more or less absconded with all the learning that we did that would have maybe dispelled it, that might have shaken loose this false identity for us. And so this is why we don't have another course that is directed to our minds. He says, Jesus says, my dear brothers and sisters, who you are cannot be improved upon. But because you are in a state of unremembering, you must relearn who you are. You can only learn who you are by sharing who you are. You can only share who you are by being who you are. And that's my favorite quote, because I've seen how true that is. From the first, we're asked not to apply any thought or effort, because our way of thought and effort has been ego-driven. We hear that it's not going to be our ego who takes this course. Instead, it's going to appeal to our hearts, to the center of ourselves where the Christ in us abides. Actually, on the second page of the prelude, which starts this course, Jesus says, "The Christ in you will be the learner." And so this came in my first day of receiving. And I was like, I don't know about that. It sounded so bizarre to me at the time. But it came to make a lot of sense, and partially because of an exchange I had with a friend. And I met my friend Bob when the treatises were coming out back in about 2003. This used to be in 3 separate volumes. So that was one of the early publications of the treatises. And he wanted to read it because a mutual friend of ours was so taken by A Course of Love. And so he came at that time, bought the treatises, read the treatises. A year or so later, I came out with the dialogues. He bought that, read that, and then he went back and read the course. And then he came to see me. And he said, "Mari, I didn't believe this course was from Jesus until I read the course. And I believe it's from Jesus now because everything that's there at the end was predicted in the beginning." And he said, "I knew you couldn't have done that yourself." Well, Christ and Christ consciousness are there at the beginning and at the end. And Jesus describes Christ consciousness in many ways. And one that I like and that I think really fits here is our will to be, to know, and to express. And I want to say I really like it that Jesus does this sort of describing more than defining, and that he describes things in so many ways. And I think this is because he recognizes our differences and wants us to recognize our differences. And to this way, with all these different descriptions, we can find what works really well for us. We can take the one that works well for us. And I also believe this is kind of taking this in the direction of knowing that when we have returned to who we are, we will all retain these differences because we're all needed as who we are. Now, the heart is the focus of the first, almost 2/3 of the book before we reunite mind and heart. We reunite mind and heart in wholeheartedness. And this is called the first union. But I really like it that it's called wholehearted. There's another phrase within the course, the elevated self of form. I always thought that was so clunky. And the only reason I think it might have been used is so that we don't forget about form. But wholeheartedness is one I really love. Because it's not only our aim in life, or our aim spiritually, but it's our aim in life too. Because we all know what it's like to be half-hearted. To think and mull and figure things out and leave our heart out of it. Or to refuse to accept a situation and so have it show up in our bodies as anxiety or a lack of enjoyment in life. With wholeheartedness, there's this sense of, well, what I see as wholehearted is a person who lives authentically and has a passion for living. And so this person can be, a lighthearted grandpa or a cranky young artist. This is more than personality. This is the whole ball of wax. This is being all that we are. Well, once we become united within ourselves, we know who we are. And so we also know who we are not. When we know who we are, we know who we are not. And that's the end of the ego. So in the treatises, we're kind of led through that movement from ego self to true self, and from being learning beings to the end of learning, so that when we enter the dialogues, we stand beyond ego and beyond learning. So that should give those who are new to A Course of Love enough of a sense of it to follow along as I address our topic of how being all that we are will change our minds and change the world. Here's a quote that can provide the setting for this topic. You are now called to discover and to become aware of all that you are. The body, rather than aiding you in learning as it once did, will aid you now in this discovery. Realize that this is a call to love all of yourself. You who once could love spirit or mind, mind or body, because of the dualistic nature associated with them, now can love all of yourself, all of God, all of creation. You can respond to love with love. This call to love all of yourself is a call to unconditional, non-judgmental love, and is the condition upon which your discovery of all that you do not yet know awaits. So much awaits. This quote wasn't my inspiration, though, for this talk. And I always like to share my inspiration because it always surprises me. And that's why I played What's Going On, because it was my inspiration for the Miracles in the Mountain Conference in 2012. And that song would not leave me alone until I realized that it was calling me to look at what was going on within A Course of Love, to look at what Jesus says is happening, the prophecy of A Course of Love. And coming to voice about that in 2012 seemed to really start everything that has happened since. Well, my inspiration for today seemed at first to draw me backwards instead of forwards. I got this inspiration 10 years ago, and 17 years ago, and 9 months ago. And what it was, I'll give you a little visual here. It was from a journal entry that I had saved all these years, which came in between when I had finished receiving the course and before I had begun the treatises. And I woke up, this was in 1999, New Year's Eve morning, and I woke up that morning with this thought in my mind, the kind of thought I've begun to call promptings. So this prompt told me, you can no longer hang on to a piece of yourself. And I did what I did then, which was turn to A Course in Miracles. What is this trying to tell me, you know? And it was unusual for me to print up journal entries. I mean, this one had something important to say to me. And so I printed it up and I saved it in my desk drawer. And that's why I talked about these years of gaps. I put it in the drawer in 1999, and I probably remembered it into the 2000s. But it had been a long time when I cleaned out that drawer when my grandson was born. It's been a long time since I'd seen it. And again, 6, 7 years later, I think it was 7 years later, it still spoke to me in such a way that I saved this sheet of paper again. And last summer, just after I got invited to speak here, I accidentally, on purpose, found it yet another time. And it still spoke to me, so I thought, okay, this is my inspiration. I knew it was calling me to talk about this today. So what I actually typed some quotes from A Course in Miracles on this page, and I'd like to share a little of that with you. There is no cause for faithlessness, but there is cause for faith. That cause has entered any situation that shares its purpose. You can leave nothing outside of it and keep the situation holy. Those words I emphasized, I had typed all in caps. Then I wrote my response saying, this is why my faithfulness in this time is so essential. What I have not given is what is lacking. Well, maybe you can already see where I'm going with this. If we hang on to pieces of ourselves, we're unable to be all that we are. If we're not being all of ourselves, we're unable to share all that we are. And so this journal entry was sort of my recognition of this, and it came at this time that I have to back up to tell you about a little bit. Before A Course of Love came, I had such a personal relationship with Jesus. I was raised a Catholic, and I just had sort of retained that childlike innocence in my love for Jesus. He was Lord of my heart. He was my best friend. When I was a single parent, I'd stay up after I got the kids in bed, and I'd write in my journal. And half of these journal entries were prayers. I'd be talking to Jesus. And I'd always feel so much better. Like, I just felt like he heard me. And when I'd enter a difficult situation, I'd say, Dear Jesus, please be with me. But when I began to receive the Course, Jesus' voice suddenly became the only voice that mattered. It's like, this was what I was there for. I was there to hear Jesus' voice, to record what he wanted me to record, and nothing else. That was it. I journaled still, but I journaled to get myself out of the way. I wanted to rid myself of me for this grand work of receiving the messages of Jesus. I didn't want to bring my concerns, my worries, my unworthy, lowly self to this work. And yet day after day, Jesus would tell me, quit feeling lowly. You're one with me. And eventually he would tell me, I don't need you for your fingers. I don't need you for your typing skills. I need all of you. And that was so hard. That was so hard to accept. The power of it all. And when I try to accept my Christ self, I'd find myself rejecting my human self. And I'd find myself heading for an ideal, like I just couldn't help it. And so I'd go that way for a while. And then I'd think, well, this isn't it. And I'd turn around and go the other way to just being me. And after a while, that didn't seem to be like it either. It was like I couldn't bring it together. And I felt like Jesus was saying, keep yourself, but change everything. Keep yourself and change everything at the same time. Not a thing here and a thing there, but everything. And still stay the same. Well, that's crazy making stuff. And I see now it's no wonder we want to slough off our old selves. Just start over. Just, slough it off and start anew. it would be so much easier. But no. Jesus wants us to be all that we were created to be in these human forms. And that's the radical newness of A Course of Love, is we're to elevate these selves of form. But having gone back and forth with these selves, trying to find that place where I can move into my true self, I looked at some really big questions, and probably the biggest one is who we are, the question of who we are. We want to know who we are. And early in this course, Jesus talks about the sun, or the moon, or the cheetah wanting to know what they are. We can't imagine him doing that, can we? But we want to know who we are, and we think we can learn who we are. We want to know the nature of our being, right? This could be called an existential need. So we want to know who we are. Then we want to be who we are. We want to be who we are, not only so that we can be peaceful and happy, but because we sense there is a beauty in us that, like the cheetah, the sun, the moon, and God, we have a nature that is natural. We have a nature that doesn't need to be thought about, taught to, or trained into being. We have the sense that if we can, it's like this deeply buried sense that if we can get back to who we are in truth, we can find the key to our joy and peace, but also to our purpose. And the sense that who we are and our purpose here has something to do with the existence of the universe itself. So we want to know who we are. We want to be who we are. And then we want to share who we are. It's a central desire to want to share, to connect with each other, to want to connect with a power greater than ourselves, to want to connect in a spiritual way of knowing and being known, and also to want to be recognized as who we are in that simple way of being who we are in our family, our school, our job, our community. Well, this is where A Course of Love begins. Jesus says, I want you to know who you are. Isn't that beautiful? I want you to know who you are. Because while you continue to identify yourself incorrectly, you cannot know who you are, be who you are, or share who you are. In chapter 6 of the Course, we hear, this is the purpose of the world and of love most kind, to end your self-deception and return you to the light. Our self-deception. We want to know who we are. My friend Larry and I were talking about that one day, about being who we are. And he said, well, most of the time we haven't got a clue who we are. And we laughed. We found that really funny.
We do.
Yeah. It's like the part, pleasure and the predicament of being human. This questioning.